everybody. Thank you for stopping by to our 2023 Financial Aid Night. I'm Mrs. Stadel. I'm one of the school counselors here. We actually have a guest here tonight to present to you guys. The process is going to look a lot different, so we figured we'll bring her in and have her share her expertise with you guys. So we have Kathy Mueller here from Mapping Your Future. So if you guys could welcome her, that would be great.
Well, thank you very much. And my first question is, has anyone here filled out the FAFSA before? Okay, so that's fantastic. You have some experience, and that will help you somewhat, but I'm going to tell you it's going to look a lot different for those of you who have completed it before. The big news, though, with regard to the FAFSA for this year's seniors who plan to go to school in 24-25 is that we will not have the FAFSA out on October 1. This year's an exception, and they're not going to have it available until sometime in December. We don't know that exact date yet, but as soon as we do know that from the Department of Education, we'll let everyone know. But there's some things you could be doing to prepare, and there was a handout out there. You probably saw that, 5 things you could be doing while you wait for the FAFSA. So there's a lot of things to be working on, but I did want to let you know about all the changes. So if you have any questions during tonight's presentation, feel free to stop me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions along the way while you're thinking of those questions. I wanted to talk to you about our organization just briefly. I'm Kathy Mueller with Mapping Your Future. Mapping Your Future is a South Dakota-based nonprofit organization, and we help students in South Dakota plan, prepare, and pay for college. All of our services are free. We're funded by the South Dakota Education Access Foundation, which is part of the South Dakota Community Foundation. And this is a website that you can use to get information. It's got South Dakota specific information. But we also have a couple of tools on this website that might be helpful. One of those is the College Explorer tool. And that tool will help you look at different colleges. It defaults to South Dakota institutions, but you can look at any institution in the United States that receives federal financial aid. But the great thing about that tool is you can find the best fit. You can find the cost of attendance. You can find out where it's located, what programs are offered, the graduation rate, the admissions rate, the average amount of student loan debt that students have from that institution. So I encourage you to use that tool, especially as we're coming up on college application period in South Dakota. And that will be a time that you can apply free at many South Dakota institutions. I'll talk about that later in the presentation. Another tool is the career tool, and that allows you to search on different career fields. And if you already know what career field you're interested in, you can look at specific jobs. You can search by highest paid, by those that have the most openings, and also those that are trending. So I encourage you to look at this website if you have a chance. So tonight we're going to talk about paying for college. We're going to look at the FAFSA. We're going to go through that FAFSA process. And I'm going to talk about the South Dakota programs as well as other resources to help you pay for college. So when you think about paying for education, there are 4 resources that most people use. That is savings, and that can be savings of either the student or the parent. Current earnings. So while a student is in college, if they have a part-time job, they could earn money that helps pay for their education. The parents are working, and their current earnings could also be used. My daughter just graduated from college, and she had a part-time job that helped pay for her education, and then I used some of my current earnings as well. And what that did was that helps reduce the amount that you need to rely on student loans. So I do encourage that. We're going to talk about financial aid tonight, and then there are tax credits and deductions. Now, they don't help you pay for a college education right now, but they do offset the cost of an education. And so when you file your tax return, make sure you take advantage of any tax credits and deductions. regard to the financial aid process, we're going to look at it at a high overview first, and then I'm going to specifically look at the FAFSA process. And because it's changing this year, so I wanted to go through these two processes. So at a high level, the student and at least one parent will create an FSA ID, and we're going to talk about each one of these processes as we go through the presentation. Then the student and parent will complete the FAFSA. About a week later, the student's going to get the FAFSA submission summary. They're going to get an email letting them know that they've got this summary out there to look at. So the student will need to look at it and make sure everything's accurate and verify that online. Later on, after the student has been admitted, they'll receive a financial aid offer from the school, college, or university. And the student and parent will carefully review that offer and decide what aid they want to accept. And again, we're going to talk about all of these processes later in the presentation. So when you think about the FAFSA specifically, the process has changed, or it will change when the new FAFSA comes out. And so I wanted to give you this high-level overview of just the FAFSA process before we go into the actual FAFSA itself. The student will start the FAFSA, they'll fill in some information, and then the student will be asked to invite their parent or parents to complete their portion of the FAFSA. Then, while the student has invited the parent comes in, they'll complete their part, but the student will still have some to complete, and whoever finishes their part last will be the one that will actually be submitting the FAFSA for processing. Now, this is the Department of Education's recommended process for the new FAFSA. However, in reality, and if you're a parent, you'll know what I'm saying here, most of us help our students fill out the FAFSA, and rightfully so. A lot of the information they're providing, they may not have access to. So there is a process out there where the parent can start the FAFSA and then invite the student to do their part on the FAFSA. I'll show that in some of the slides here in just a little bit, but in reality, you might want to be together completing the FAFSA at the same time. The reason the department recommends this is because the way they look at it, the FAFSA belongs to the student, and so they recommend that the student be the one that starts the FAFSA. So before we start the FAFSA, I did want to talk about the different types of financial aid. And there are 4 basic types of financial aid. There are grants and scholarships. And grants and scholarships are the best kind of financial aid because a student typically does not have to pay that back. I say typically because grants and scholarships can come with requirements or obligations. And the requirements could be getting a certain GPA or an obligation to work in a certain career field. And if a student fails to meet those requirements or obligations, they could lose the grant or scholarship, or they could have to pay it back. So just remember that they are the best kind of financial aid, but before a student accepts it, they should know what the requirements and obligations are. Also, there are work-study programs, and work-study is a federal need-based program, meaning the student has to have financial need in order to receive work-study. And not all schools offer work-study, but basically what work-study does is it offers the student a job, either on campus and sometimes off campus, and they can work in that job and earn money that will help them pay for any of their expenses while they're in school. And finally, there are loans. And loans can be federal loans. They can be state loans. Some states offer state loan programs. And then there are private loans. We always recommend that students look at federal loans first. And the reason for that is because federal loans offer the best benefits, the best repayment options for students. And so it's important that they look at those loans first before considering especially private loans. I do want to say when a student completes a FAFSA, as long as they meet the basic eligibility requirements, they are eligible to receive federal direct student loans. So what is the FAFSA? It's the free application for federal student aid. And note that word free. You should never pay to complete the FAFSA, nor do you need to pay anyone to help you complete the FAFSA. There are organizations like Mapping Your Future. We help students and parents one-on-one all the time with the FAFSA. We answer questions. So there are organizations like us out there that help students and parents. Also, it's the base application for various forms of federal or financial aid. So not only federal, but state governments use the FAFSA, including South Dakota. Institutions, meaning the school, college, or university, uses it to determine who receives their financial aid programs. Also, there are even some private foundations that use the information on the FAFSA to award scholarships. So I sometimes hear a student say, I'm not going to fill out the FAFSA because I don't want student loans and I'm not going to qualify for any need-based aid. But they should still fill it out because of these other programs. And my daughter's a good example. She did not qualify for need-based aid, but had to fill out the FAFSA because she was offered a study abroad scholarship. And that was a merit scholarship that she would not receive unless she filled out the FAFSA. It will, like I mentioned earlier, not be available until sometime in December. We don't know the exact date. We're waiting for the Department of Education to give us that information. There's some conversations about the federal budget and whether that will impact that date or not. But as of now, we are hoping that it will be out by, at least by the end of December. So to complete the FAFSA, the student and parents will go to studentaid.gov. And that is an important website to remember because that is where the student will do everything that's related to their federal financial aid. Not only will they start the FAFSA there, it's also where they will view that FAFSA submission summary that I talked about earlier. It's where they'll make any corrections if they need to. And they, in the future, can view their aid history there. And also, just a reminder, if a student wants to continue to be eligible for financial aid in the future, they'll need to complete a renewal FAFSA every year. They will get a reminder about it via email, and also it's a lot easier because they already have a lot of your information pre-filled. So there's some new terms this year, and I have a lot of them here on the screen, or some of them, let me say. I'm not going to go through all of these right now because we're going to talk about them as we go through the FAFSA, so you'll hear these terms as we go through the FAFSA. But I did want to mention contributor because that's a new term and it can be kind of confusing. Anyone who contributes to a student's FAFSA, including the student, the parent or parents, and if the student is married, the student's spouse, will be known as a contributor because they are contributing information. It does not obligate anyone who's contributing to the student's FAFSA to contribute to that student's education financially. So just remember that term. I did want to talk about who is a parent for FAFSA purposes, and the basic definition for FAFSA purposes is it's the student's biological and or adoptive parents. Now we know sometimes students live with relatives. They may live with their grandparents or an aunt or an uncle or even a sibling. Those are not the student's parents unless they legally adopted the student. This year on the FAFSA, they have a new tool. It's called the Parent Wizard, and that helps the student determine what parent to invite to the FAFSA. And we'll see that here when we complete the FAFSA. I've included a chart here to show you who needs an FSA ID and what parent will contribute to the student's FAFSA. because there's been a few changes with the 24-25 FAFSA. The most common situations are, if the student's parents are married, if the student's parents file joint taxes, only one parent will need an FSA ID. But if the student's parents are married, but they file their taxes separately, both parents will need an FSA ID. If the parents are divorced or separated, in that case, both parents may need an FSA ID. They have changed this year. If parents are divorced or separated, the student will provide information about the parent that provided the most support to the student. We know there are joint custody situations and parents may equally contribute to a student's expenses. With that in mind though, then the Department of Education will look at the income tax return of both parents and use the information of the parent that has the most income. So in that case, where it's a joint custody, both parents will need an FSA ID. I'm not going to talk about the rest of those on the screen, but if anybody has that situation and has a question about it, let me know and I'd be happy to help you. And I'll stay around a little bit after tonight's presentation too. So creating an FSA ID. I encourage you to go ahead and get your FSA ID right now because that process is out there and available for you to do that if you don't already have one. The reason for that is this year the FSA ID will have to be verified by the Social Security Administration before you can complete a FAFSA. In the past, they allowed you to go ahead and do the FAFSA and you could get your FSA ID at the same time or even sometimes afterwards. That will no longer be the case. They want you to have that FSA ID verified. It doesn't take very long either to create it or to get it verified for that matter. But we don't want everyone, which could be millions of people, in December when the FAFSA is announced trying to get their FSA ID at the same time. And so we're encouraging people to go ahead and get your FSA ID, keep that username and password in a safe, secure location, and you'll have it when it comes out in December, and you'll be ready to go. And it'll be a big help if you have that already in advance. And by the way, if you filled out the FAFSA before, or if you had your FSA ID as a parent because you were a student in the past, that FSA ID is fine. It's already been verified, and you can use it this year. So the FSA ID will not only be used to set up your, or fill out your FAFSA, you're going to be using it for several functions. And there were a couple of other things I did want to mention about the FSA ID. It doesn't take very long to set it up, but when you do set it up, make sure that you use a personal email address. For students, they should not use a school email address, and parents should not use a work email address. This is going to be your FSA ID into the future. So if you use a school email address, you may not have access to that after you graduate. Parents may not have access to a work email if you change jobs. So just keep that in mind. Use a personal email address. And also remember that students and parents cannot share an FSA ID. Everyone needs their own FSA ID. So you'll use it as a student if you want to take out student loans to sign the master promissory note. If you take out student loans, loan counseling is a federal requirement and you have to have the FSA ID for that as well. And then in the future, you'll use it to sign in to studentaid.gov at any time to check your dashboard. And also, if you do take out student loans and you want a different repayment plan, you'll need the FSA ID for that. For parents, in addition to contributing to the student's FAFSA, if the parent decides to take out a Parent Plus loan for the student, they'll need the FSA ID for that as well. So because the IRS, or the Department of Education, is really pulling your information from the Internal Revenue Service, you don't have to fill out a lot of financial information this year. So it should be a lot easier when you get ready to fill out the 24-25 FAFSA. However, I do recommend you still have these documents with you. And make a note, it's the 22 federal income tax information they're going to be using. Because the 24-25 FAFSA uses prior year, they'll be looking at your 22 tax information for the 24-25 FAFSA. So have that tax return with you because you might need to look at some information. You might be asked some questions. So I would recommend having this. You may not need all of it. Hopefully you won't. But just in case, go ahead and have that with you. And it makes it a little bit easier when you do sit down to fill it out. So we're going to start the FAFSA as if we were a student. We're going to go through it as the Department of Education recommends. And the student will log in, and then they'll select that they are a student. But if you notice, there is the option for the parent there. If you want to go through the process with the parent starting it, and then you invite the student, the parent will need to log in and then select parent. But again, we're going to go through it tonight, the recommended process from the Department of Education. The student will see some onboarding screens. These are to educate the student about the process, kind of get them really acquainted with what to expect as they complete the FAFSA. This is the student identifiers, and if you'll notice, it's already pre-filled for the student. It's pulling information from your FSA ID. And if any of this information needs to be changed, you cannot change it if it's your date of birth, social security number, email, or phone number. You have to go into the FSA ID profile in order to change anything that appears on this screen. Hopefully all that information is accurate and doesn't have to change, but it should change instantaneously, we've been told, if the student notices that there's a mistake in some of that information, like their email or something like that. You can update the address information from this screen. The student will also be asked about their state of legal residence, and that is to determine eligibility for some financial aid programs. New this year is because they're pulling information about everybody from the IRS, the student will have to consent, basically give approval to the Department of Education to pull their information from the IRS. Now, we know not all students file income tax returns. Some do, but it doesn't matter. Even if you don't file a tax return, or if you do, you have to give approval or the FAFSA will not be processed and you can't go forward. So the student will read this information and they will then accept it and begin the process. The student will then be asked about their personal circumstances and they'll be asked about their marital status. Then they will be asked about the level that they will be in college when they start. Basically, they'll be asked about their college or career school plans. A lot of students will enter that they are a first-year freshman. Now, we know that students have dual credits, and so sometimes they're actually entering college as a sophomore, perhaps. But we still want the student to say on this screen, even if they have dual credits, that they will be a first-year freshman, because technically they've never been on a college campus. And the reason for that is because it impacts their eligibility for some programs. And so it's important that they enter that they're a first-year freshman. The credits, the dual credits, that's another office on the campus, not the financial aid office, and so they'll take those credits into consideration. I did want to mention too that with regard to these plans, they'll ask about whether or not it's their first bachelor's degree, and again, that's to determine eligibility for federal financial aid. Then the student will be asked these questions. And what they're trying to determine is whether the student is an independent student or a dependent student for FAFSA purposes. And what we mean by that is an independent student will not provide parent information. A dependent student will provide parent information. Now, most high school seniors are considered dependent students, but there are exceptions. So if a student can answer yes to any one of those questions, they would be considered independent. If they answered no to all of them, they would be dependent students. And so as you can see, there are exceptions, and those are the exceptions, and that would make a student independent. But most high school seniors are considered dependent students. One of those exceptions is if the student is homeless, and the student can indicate that here, and that may have to be verified either by the school or other organizations like TRIO or a social service agency. There are also unusual circumstances some students face, and they can't provide parent information. They are given the option here to indicate that they have one of those circumstances that you see on the screen. It does have to fit into those categories. Sometimes there are situations where students decide to move out of their house or their parents' home because they don't get along with their parents. That's not an unusual circumstance, and so that doesn't qualify for unusual circumstances. And that student, because it's a choice, would still be obligated to ask their parents to complete their portion of the FAFSA. This is the start of the parent wizard, and so basically they're asking the student to tell them about their parents. And again, in situations of divorce or separation, they're going to be looking at who provides the most support, and if it's equal, then it will be that parent that provides or has the most income. Again, if the parents are married, as long as they are filing their taxes jointly, only one parent will need an FSA ID. So then the student knows what parent to invite, so they're going to enter this information on the FAFSA. And this screen is a little tricky because it asks the student to put the parent's social security number, email address, and then invite the parent. To be honest with you, my daughter would not know my social security number, nor would she know my email address, I don't think. This is where if you have the student starting the FAFSA and inviting the parent, it's where I recommend the parent be looking over the student's shoulder and helping them with this. I will say, I did hear yesterday from some inside sources that they're considering removing the social security number field on here. And then the student would just put the email address, but I can't verify that yet. So this screen could change. And just so you know, some of the screens on here could change as they are still kind of making little tweaks to the FAFSA, you might say. But right now, the way it stands is the student will enter the social security number of the parent and the email address. And then they will basically invite the parent to their FAFSA. Now, while the parent is being invited, the student still has some things to complete. So one of those is this demographic survey. And this survey is mandatory, but the student does have the option to say they prefer not to answer these questions. It does not impact their financial aid at all, and this information is only used for research. The student will be asked about the parent education status, and the reason for this question is the Department of Education is trying to determine the number of first-generation college students. The student will be asked if they've had a parent killed in the line of duty, and this is to determine eligibility for grant programs. And then the student will be asked to enter their high school information, and this is pretty easy to enter. They'll be asked if they will have a high school diploma. They'll indicate that on the screen, and then they'll enter the address of their school and the name of it, and it should pop up on the screen for them, and they just select their high school. The student will be asked some financial questions, and if they didn't file any income tax return or anything like that, they'll enter 0 into these fields. But it's basically to determine if they had some of these that were untaxed income or that might have shown up on their income tax return. If the student, the student may be asked about assets. Let me say, this might be an argument here for the parent to do their portion first, because if the parents have an income less than $60,000, neither the parent nor the student will be asked about assets. But if the income, if the parent hasn't filled it out, and if the income of the parent is over $60,000, the parent will be asked about assets. The student will be asked as well, but if they don't have any assets, they'll just enter 0 in those fields. Then the student will select the schools that they want to receive their information. And now they can list up to 20 colleges or schools or universities on the FAFSA. Let me say that's a lot of schools. So if a student does that, they're probably very well organized, because I know I'd be a little overwhelmed with 20 schools, but some people do want to list that many schools. So they can list all of those schools. All of those schools will receive all of the information that the student entered on the FAFSA. Now, they may not process it until the student has been admitted to the institution. So just remember, the admissions process is separate from the financial aid process. And so the student still needs to apply for admission to the institutions as well if he's serious about, he or she is serious about attending that institution. Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, so if she has money in savings and it's asking her this information, would we be smart to get it out of her savings, put it in our son's savings?
Okay, so
that's gonna hurt her if she has money?
So the question was, if the student has savings in their account, should they take it out of their savings? Well, first of all, let me say I'm not a financial advisor. So that's important to note. It is a decision up to you, but I would say if you don't want to include it on there, you may want to move it, but that again is up to you, because she will have to report it otherwise. Okay. So then the student will be given a review page, and they can click on the different sections and make sure that everything's accurate. And then they will be told or just reminded of who they've invited to complete the parent portion of the FAFSA. Then the student will be asked to sign the FAFSA, and this year it's just going to be a little checkbox. And let me say here, the student is agreeing that everything they've provided is accurate and true to the best of their knowledge, and that if they receive any federal funds for their education, they'll use it for the purposes intended. After submitting that, they'll get a summary, again, another reminder of who they've invited, and kind of a description of what's going to happen next. So now we're going to go over to the parent portion. This is what the email will look like that the parent will receive, inviting them to the student's FAFSA. And so they'll get that blue box that says log in. And then they will go to that screen, log in, and they will receive, again, a reminder that they've been invited to that student's FAFSA, and they can hit the Get Started button. If the parent has their own financial aid history and have had a FSA ID for a while, you may see information about your financial aid on there as well. Then the parent will get some instructions, some FAQs, and an onboarding screen as well. So they'll get the same kind of basic information that the student received. Similar to the student, the parent will enter their identifying information, but again, it's going to be on the screen here for you already because of pulling it from your FSA ID. Same thing, you can't change some of it from this screen without going into the FSA ID profile and changing it there, but you can update your address information. The parent will also be asked to approve the Department of Education pulling their information from the IRS. And again, just a reminder, the FAFSA won't be processed unless the parent gives approval. Then they will ask the parent about their demographics, so their marital status and their state of legal residence. And then they will ask the parents their tax filing status. And then they're going to ask if the parents received any federal benefits or the family received any federal benefits. If they did, they will not have to provide asset information on the FAFSA. Parents or students with parents who do not have a social security number still need to have their parents contribute to the FAFSA. The Department of Education is setting up a process for those parents to get an FSA ID. That process is not in place yet, but it should be by the time the FAFSA comes out. The parents will be asked to verify the household or the family size on the FAFSA. The Department of Education has pulled that family size from the tax return, but we know that's not always accurate because you may claim somebody on your tax return that doesn't live with you, or you may not claim somebody that does live with you. So they're asking you to verify it or correct it if necessary. The number in college is asked on the FAFSA, but let me say it's no longer a factor in the federal financial aid need analysis. But it's still being asked because some states do consider the number in college as a factor. Also, some institutions will consider the number in college as a part of their determination on who receives their institutional financial aid. So, if you have multiple children in college, you might want to let the college or school or university that the student is attending know that, just so they realize your situation. The parent will be asked some questions, some financial questions, and again, these will be much less than what we saw on previous FAFSAs, but whether or not you received the Earned Income Tax Credit, you had any grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits, or if you had any foreign earned income exclusion. And then the parent will be asked about assets. And so assets have changed a lot. And again, if you received any federal benefits, or if you have an income of $60,000 or less, you will not be asked about assets on the FAFSA. But if you are asked about assets, you're going to include information about child support, and that's now considered an asset. You'll be asked about cash, savings, and checking accounts, and they want to know the balance the day you're filling out the FAFSA. Basically, all the asset information is current information, even though the tax information is prior year. So they're looking at this as the current situation for the family. Then you'll also be asked about businesses and investment farms. So this is a change from previous years. In the past, you only included businesses or investment farms if you had 100 or fewer employees. Let me say to stay tuned here on this issue. There's still debate going on at the federal level, and there's been proposals in Congress. I don't think the proposals in Congress are going to change the 24-25 FAFSA, but we could get additional guidance on this issue. So if you're impacted by this, I would certainly be, before you fill out the FAFSA, contact us if there's been any updated guidance on this issue. Because we know calculating a business and a farm is a complicated issue. And you can have two people calculating the value of a business or a farm, and they can come up with two very different answers. We do have a basic formula, but again, it's a very basic formula, so it could be too simple when we're talking about a complicated matter of determining the value of a farm or business. I'm going to show you that calculation in just a moment, but I did want to say that also investments need to be included, including like real estate investments. So if you have a rental property, you'll want to calculate the value of that, and again, you'll have to use a formula for that as well. So this is a formula. Basically, you look at the market value, subtract any debt, and then you'll come up with the net value. So if you had a property worth $100,000, it was a rental property, and you had an $80,000 mortgage on it, you would only put $20,000 down on the FAFSA. Again, that's a very simple version of the calculation. The parent then may be asked to provide information about the other parent, so they'll fill that out if necessary. Then the parent will be asked to review the information that they've provided on the FAFSA, and they can make any corrections from this screen if they need to. And here, the parent will sign the FAFSA. It's just clicking that checkbox. Basically, they're agreeing that everything they've provided is accurate and true, and then they will hit next or submit, and then they will get a summary screen of what happens next as well. So now that the FAFSA has been submitted, because both the student and the parent or parents have completed their portion of the FAFSA, the student should get an email a few days later letting them know they have a FAFSA submission summary to look at. And the FAFSA submission summary is, first of all, basically a summary of what the student submitted on the FAFSA. So it's really a true definition of what it says. But it also has some additional information, which I think is great this year. It lets the student know right away if they will likely be Pell eligible, meaning they can get a grant, how much loans they could be eligible to receive, and this is only the federal aid, by the way, or if they're eligible for work study. So the great thing about that information is for the student and the parent or parents, you can plan ahead. You'll have an idea if the student is likely to get a Pell Grant or not, and that can help you determine what college you can afford. So I think this is very helpful information. It's new with the 24-25 FAFSA. The other thing I want to point out is the Student Aid Index, and that's a measure that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. Before we do that, I did want to mention that there's help completing the FAFSA. You see some of that on the screen here. Note the Mapping Your Future 800 number if you need any assistance when you get ready to fill out the FAFSA. So the Student Aid Index, it is what the Department of Education says a student and their family can reasonably be expected to contribute to the student's education. And it stays the same regardless of college, and it's part of a formula of awarding financial aid, and I'm going to show you that formula in just a moment. But I want you to note that they look at what they think the student can contribute and what they think the parent can contribute. And new is it can be a negative number. The negative number alerts the school, college, or university that this student has a high amount of need. And so they're not going to get any more federal financial aid, but they could possibly get additional institutional aid. It will be up to the institution, the school, college, or university, to decide that. But if they see that this student has high need and they have some funds available, that student could be awarded additional funds. So how do they award financial aid? First of all, they take the cost of attendance. And remember that the cost of attendance is not just tuition and fees. It's also books and supplies. It's living expenses, including housing and food. It may be transportation, and it also could be special equipment like in some of the programs, we know at the technical colleges, they need special equipment to complete those programs. So they'll calculate that cost of attendance for the student, and then they will subtract that student aid index. Now, if the student aid index is a negative, they're going to change it to 0 because you don't want to subtract a negative and get, that will get a positive. So we're going to turn it to 0. They'll subtract any other financial aid assistance that the student has received that they're aware of, and they'll determine if the student has financial need. And they'll award as much financial aid as they can to meet that student's need. If the student has a gap, meaning they didn't get enough money to pay for the total cost of attendance, then we recommend, and we always recommend students do this anyway, to look at scholarships. So this is an example of what a student could receive in terms of federal financial aid. And this is the numbers for this year. We don't know yet what they'll be for 24-25. But if a student has need, they could receive a Pell Grant of anywhere from basically $739 to $7,395. So basically anywhere from 10% to the full amount. But they do have to have financial need to receive a Pell Grant. All students who complete the FAFSA and meet the basic eligibility requirements can get a federal direct student loan of $5,500. Now, if the student has financial need, they could have part of that loan subsidized, meaning that the federal government will pay the interest on that loan while the student's in school and during periods of deferment. And that's a great benefit for a student, and because as it is right now, interest capitalizes. That could be changed. There's debate in Congress about that right now. But right now, interest capitalizes on a student loan, and it's added to the principal, and so that causes student loans to grow rapidly. So this is a good benefit. Also, the parents can borrow up to the cost of attendance, minus any financial aid that the student has received. And just a reminder, this is just the federal financial aid. It doesn't include any state or any private scholarships or institutional aid. This is an example of a financial aid offer. It's sometimes called an award letter. I recommend that the student and parent or parents really review this carefully. Know what are grants and scholarships, and just a reminder, make sure they understand the requirements and obligations of those grants and scholarships. Know what are loans. And just a reminder, the student can accept or reject any or all of the financial aid that's offered to them. So I wanted to talk about some of the South Dakota programs. First of all, the Opportunity Scholarship is a great program here in South Dakota, and they did increase the amounts for it this year. So it's now $1,500 for 3 years and $3,000 for the last year. It does have requirements of a minimum GPA, minimum ACT, and curriculum requirements. But I encourage students to try to meet those requirements because this can really be a great help in funding their education. And the deadline, deadline is in September, but really they want you to get everything in by June 1st. The application is now online, but you will get a reminder, I think, from the counseling office here at your school. The Dakota Core Scholarship Program is tuition and applicable fees at South Dakota institutions. It does have a requirement that the student stay in the state to work in a specific critical need occupation. And this is one of those situations where a scholarship will turn into a loan if the student doesn't meet the requirements. The application is online, and they have moved up the deadline for this one to December 15th. So if you're interested in that, make a note of that new deadline. The needs-based grant program is for those students who at least enroll part-time at a participating institution, and they do have to have financial need, which is indicated by completing the FAFSA. And there's the application and information online as well. The Build Dakota Scholarship Program is a very popular program here in South Dakota, and it is for those students enrolled in a high-need workforce area program at one of the 4 technical colleges. I do want to say on this one, they have a new requirement that the student have an employer sponsor for this scholarship program. So if the student has been working with an employer, maybe that employer can sponsor them for this scholarship. But if the student is interested and they don't have a sponsor, they can contact the technical colleges, one of them, whichever one they're interested in attending, and let them know they don't have a sponsor, but they would like to work with the college and find one. They do have people on their campus that work with students on this Build Dakota Scholarship Program. The Freedom Scholarship was new last year, and there's no application right now that the student would complete for it. But if they are offered that scholarship, they do have to go out and complete an application. It is for those students who have a high need, and you'll be offered it from the institution, more than likely via the financial aid offer that you saw earlier. But it does have a requirement that students stay in South Dakota for a period of time, and so as such, if they don't do that, it will turn into a loan, so it's important that you note that requirement. The Jump Start Scholarship Program is not for high school seniors, but I included here because some of the parents may have younger students, and just note that the student has to graduate high school in 3 years or less to be eligible for this program. And then the Critical Teaching Needs Scholarship Program is for those students who want to work in a critical teaching need occupation for 5 years here in South Dakota. Again, these requirements must be met or it will turn into a loan. And you can find out more information online about the different occupations that fit with this scholarship. I do want to talk a little bit about scholarships because I think they're very, very important. And I know high school seniors are very busy. They've got a lot on their plate. But let me say that applying for scholarships is really time well spent. Because if a student spends just 10 hours applying for scholarships and they win one $1,000 scholarship, that's like earning $100 an hour. So in my opinion, I think that's a pretty good return on the time investment. So in order to be successful, I think there's some things that students can do. And the first is to be organized and plan. Know the cost of attendance. You can use that college tool on the Mapping Your Future website to find out the cost of attendance, or contact the institution you're considering attending. Use that cost of attendance as your scholarship goal. And then try to find the number of scholarships that will meet or exceed that goal, because you're not going to necessarily receive every scholarship you apply for. But look locally, look at the colleges or universities you plan to attend, or the school, look on their website. All of them list a lot of scholarships on their website. Look at employer programs. Both of my daughters received scholarships from my employer and my husband's employer. And all we had to do was fill out a simple application online. And so I encourage you to look at employers to see if there are scholarships available. Look at organizations or employers that align with the student's interest. So I belong to several different professional organizations, and we award scholarships because we want to see young people coming into our career field. I know when I went to college many years ago, I was at the University of Delaware, and I applied for a scholarship from the Delaware Media Association because I was in the field of communication, and I got that scholarship. I had no affiliation with that organization, but again, they were looking to award and recognize young people that were going into their field. And then also there are the scholarship search engines. Just be careful, make sure it's a legitimate search engine, and if you aren't sure, you can check with us. I also list a few here in a future slide. Sorry, can you go back just 1 second there? On the other tips here, make sure that you prepare the applications carefully. Have somebody else look at your essay and your application to avoid any typos or grammatical errors. I know I can write something and look at it a million times over and not see the mistake in it. Somebody else looks at it and they see it right away. So it's really important to have another set of eyes on anything. Then also stay organized. We have a scholarship tracking tool that will help you keep organized in your search, and I'll provide a link to that in just a minute. Make sure you meet the deadlines and requirements. I do serve on scholarship review committees, and we don't consider anyone who has not met the deadline or followed the instructions, because it's not fair to those students who did meet the deadline and follow the instructions. So just make sure that you meet all the requirements. And then you might want to consider having a dedicated email address. And you can use that to register with the scholarship search engines. And then if you get an email saying we've got a scholarship matching your profile, you're more likely to see it than if it was mixed in with all of your other personal email. And let me say, I've had parents tell me that also they have a dedicated email address for all of their college-related activities. So they'll use it for admissions, and they'll use it for other things as well, and then everything is all in one place. Just a reminder about the free college application period here in South Dakota, October 1 through November 30th. It's a great opportunity to apply to many South Dakota institutions without paying an application fee. And those application fees can add up if you're applying, especially now that you can list 20 colleges on the FAFSA, you might want to be applying to 20. So keep that in mind. That's a great opportunity for students. The Board of Regents has a list of to-dos. We've talked about some of these to-dos tonight. Probably just another reminder, get your FSA ID as soon as you can, because it's going to be good to have that and be prepared when the FAFSA does come out. These are some resources for students and families, and note our websites there, the southdakota.mappingyourfuture.org website, and Mapping Your Future is a national organization, so we have a national website. You're encouraged to visit that site as well. Studentaid.gov is the site you need to remember for anything related to the FAFSA and federal financial aid. And there's a link to our scholarship tracking sheet, as well as some scholarship search engines, and we have more on our website. With that, any questions for me? Yes?
So, I know there's a lot changing here with the new applications for the high school seniors. What about the renewals? Is there anything changing with that process for next year?
So to repeat the question, and I think this is a great question, we have a lot of things new for seniors this year who are first-time FAFSA filers. What about those students who are already in college and will need to file the renewal FAFSA? The process will be changing for everyone. So those students who are filing a renewal FAFSA will also see this new process. But it should be easier for students filing the renewal FAFSA because a lot of this information is already going to be in the FAFSA for them.
Is it delayed until December for them as well?
And another question is if the FAFSA is delayed for renewal FAFSA filers as well, and yes, it is. Yes?
On the FSA ID, for the parents, my wife and I have been over 20 years. Is that still a viable ID? I mean, we don't even know what it is. We gotta go try and find it, or just do a new one?
So, probably 20 years. They did change the process maybe about 15 years ago. So it's probably been more than 15 years. I would recommend getting a new one.
So just go through this process you laid out tonight.
Yeah, and I apologize. I forgot to repeat the question. They were asking whether or not an FSA ID that maybe was created 20 years ago would still be good. I would say that anyone that has not logged in within 15 years would need to create a new one. If you aren't sure, you can call the FSA Federal Aid Hotline, but sometimes that's difficult to get through, particularly with this year and all the changes. You can contact Mapping Your Future. We'll help you go through some steps to try to recover it. But if you don't remember the email address or anything like that, you don't probably have any federal financial aid records that you're worried about right now, you might want to consider creating a new one.
So that wouldn't create a problem?
No.
You know, two things possibly out there in the past kind of thing.
It should not, because it used to be that you had what they called a PIN, and that is totally separate process from the FSA ID.
And
So
that
if you-
sounds like what I remember.
Yeah,
So
if you had an FSA PIN,
that
then,
should be gone and, okay,
yeah, that should be a totally deleted process.
great.
Any other questions for me? If not, I did want to let you know my contact information again. And also, I will stay around for a little bit if anybody wants to ask me a question as well. But be sure to note this 800 number and our feedback email. As a nonprofit organization, we're here to help people, and so we want you to take advantage of this resource. Thank you very much.